Hello everyone, in this video I will be showing you how you can use the painting techniques that you learned in class to create this fall landscape. Before you begin, you will need to have these items ready in front of you. You will need your large, medium, and small brushes, a plate or a piece of old Tupperware to mix your paints on, your paints, some salt, some masking tape, a cup of water, some thick paper, and a pencil. It will also be very useful to use the notes with the painting techniques that you made in class the other day as you go through this process. Once you have those items, you are ready to begin. You're going to start by taking some masking tape and taping down the edges of your paper. This will ensure that as you start your painting, that your page will not curl and it will stay nice and flat until the very end. As I'm taping this down, I want you to notice how I'm doing it. Yes, I am putting the majority of my tape on the edge of the paper, but I am also sticking it to the table as well. Notice that I'm leaving just a little bit of excess outside the paper so that the edges can stick to the table too. I am also using my thumbs to press the tape down and seal it and make sure that it's secure so that no water can leak through. Alright, and now it is time to map out our landscape. I'm going to start with 3 trees, and I'm going to start with the largest one. I'm using my pencil, and very lightly I am just drawing some lines upward from the bottom of the paper all the way to the top. I want you to notice how slow I am going. This ensures that I am being very careful with my lines and I am making them as straight as possible. I also want you to notice how far back my hand is on the pencil. This is a little trick that I like to use to make sure that my pressure with my pencil is nice and light. Having light pressure makes it so that if you make a mistake, you can erase it very easily. It'll also make it so that when you go to add your paint over your pencil is not showing through, and it looks like you went through the painting with no drawing whatsoever. So just to clarify, what I'm doing is drawing 3 tree trunks. One's going to be thick, one's going to be medium, and one's going to be small, and they're going to be going back in space. I am also adding a horizon line as well as a winding path. Alright, and I'm going to take a second to pause and I'm just going to show you the finished piece ahead of time. The reason why is because as I was recording, I realized that I made my lines way too light for the camera to pick my pencil lines up. Please use this as a reference to know how to map your trees out. If needed, you may stop the video right here and use this picture as a reference image to lightly sketch out your trees and landscape. Take a moment to do that before going on to the next step. Alright, and now I'm getting myself ready to paint. I am taking all the colors of the rainbow. I'm taking red, and I'm taking orange, and I'm going to take a nice yellow, and I'll take a green and a blue, and I'll take a purple eventually, and then I'll take a brown and I'll take a black. They aren't the color of the rainbows, but I'm going to use them anyway for this painting. Notice that in comparison to my last video, I am using wet paints for this demonstration. That's because I know that there's some of you in the class who are using wet tempera paints versus dry tempera paints that are similar to the ones that I used in the last video. This is just so, you know, that my video kind of is a little bit more relevant to the other half of the class. I also want you to notice that I took a very small amount of paint. Anytime you use paint that's water-based, a little bit goes a long way. Trust me when I say you're going to need even less than this for this painting. Okay, and right now I am getting ready to paint. I'm just kind of getting myself situated. I'm getting everything in a place where it's comfortable. And I wet my brush and I'm going to go for the sky right now. And I'm going to do a wet on wet technique. So what I'm doing is taking clean water and I'm just wetting my background, taking a little bit of the blue. Notice that I'm working on the side of the paint. I'm not going right into it. I'm just going on the side of the blob. And I'm just kind of dipping my brush into that wet spot that I just made on my paper in the background. Again, going on the side of that paint to take some. And I'm just blotting it onto the background. This is a wet on wet technique. Okay, so I'm going for another area and I'm wetting another spot of the background with clean water. Again, taking just a little bit of paint from the side of the paint when I dip my brush into my palette. I'm going from the side, I'm not going on top, just the side. Blotting some of that purple in there to mix with that blue. I'm gonna make this a nice, blustery, cloudy fall day. Nice and cold and chilly. Mixing the blues with the purples. All right, so I'm wetting another section of my paper for the background. Clean water, clean brush. Taking my brush onto the side of the blue and blotting that onto the background. Take a little bit of the purple, blotting that onto the background as well. Okay, and this is the point where I kind of accepted that, hey, my lines are really hard to see, so I went back in with my pencil and I made them darker. Do not do this, okay? I'm just doing this so that all of you can see where my boundaries are when I'm painting this, okay? But do not repeat that step. You want to keep your lines nice and light. Okay, so I'm going back for that wet on wet technique. So a little bit of blotting into the background with that purple. Right now I'm just cleaning my brush a little bit in my water, blotting it on my paper towel, off to the side. And I'm taking clean water, clean brush, wet that little strip there in the background, and I'm just taking some of my purples and my blues and I'm blotting them into that space as well. And notice I'm working on the side of the paint. I'm not dipping it into it, I'm working on the side of it, just hitting the edge of that paint. Okay, all right, so that background's kind of mostly done. I'm just going in, I'm touching it up. Any area where I feel like it needs a little bit more love with whatever color, I'm just going back in for it. Okay, cleaning my brush a little bit, drying it with my paper towel, analyzing it a little bit. And I'm gonna start to go for the grass. So I'm gonna do another wet on wet technique. So taking a clean brush, clean water, and I'm just laying that fresh water into my grass. Again, taking my brush, and I'm working on the side of my paint. Getting that green in there, nice and transparent. Nice and transparent. Okay, so that happened, and I didn't want that. So anytime that happens, take a little bit of your paper towel and just kind of clean it up a little bit. Okay, so yeah, the mistake's gone. It's okay. And notice I'm leaving a little bit of white space between the green and the blue-violet that I kind of just mixed up there. So again, taking that green, mixing it into the grass. And now maybe a little bit of yellow, why not? Make this worm grass. And again, this is a wet on wet technique. I'm only taking a little bit of that color, just a little bit. That way it doesn't turn out opaque. That's the beauty of watercolors or anything that's water-based like tempera, is that it's transparent. Okay, so I'm going in for another section. Again, another wet on wet technique. Wet your paper first, and I'm going in with the green. And just a little bit of the yellow. Keep this transparent. And keeping a little bit of space between the sky and the grass. So a little bit of a white line. That way we ensure that they do not run into each other and your grass doesn't become purple and your sky doesn't become green. Touching things up a little bit. I still got that last strip there. Doing a little bit of maintenance with my paper towel, getting rid of paint that went where it shouldn't. So I'm going to go for that last strip. Wet that. Clean brush. Okay, going for my green. A little bit of water. Oop, that was my yellow. I lied. Who knows what I'm doing right here? Okay, but anyway, the point is I'm going in with the yellow. And I'm going in with a little bit of the green. Keeping this nice and transparent and nice and watery, making sure it doesn't run into my trees. Just a note, if you lay your clean water in the right places, you will not have a problem with your paint running into the trees. Okay, so this is good for now. Okay, I need to let this dry. But before I let it dry, I am going to salt the purple and blue part. So I took just a little bit, I'm pinching it, I'm kind of sprinkling it with my hand so I have a little bit more control over it. It looks like I'm going into the green and the blue, or sorry, the green and the yellow, but I'm not. I'm only doing it in the blue and purple. And I'm taking my brush because my background got just a little bit dry and I blotted it into the background again. And again, I'm taking the salt just into the sky. It looks like I'm taking it onto the green in this video, but I'm not. It's only going into the sky. Salt only goes on the sky. Do not be fooled by this weird camera angle. Salt is only going on the sky. Okay, so this needs to dry. So I'm kind of looking at it right now and I'm just kind of analyzing it, making sure that I'm happy with it. Kind of thinking about what my next steps are going to be. Maybe making sure that, you know, there's nothing else I want to do, and I think I'm pretty happy with it. So at this point, take a break and let it dry completely. And once you have, we're going to come back to it. Okay, now we're going to go for that wash technique. So I'm taking a little bit of black in my brown, and this I'm going to make opaque. So in contrast to the last technique that I just did, I want to make this line on the side of my tree here opaque. And notice I'm using a little bit of a thinner brush here. Okay, taking some of my black and my brown, cleaning my brush a little bit, muddying up the side of that line there. Notice that I'm not going all the way over that line. I'm just going on the edge of it, just so I pick up some of the paint, but I'm still left with some of that opaque line. All right, then I'm going to take my napkin. I'm going to blot the edge up a little bit, and that's going to texturize that tree a little bit. Blotting it so you get that nice little textured edge on the inside of the tree there. So making some more of the edge. Notice how I am doing this in chunks rather than just going from the top to the bottom all the way down. That is very important, okay? If you do the whole thing and then try to do this wash technique, it's going to dry up before you get a chance. Okay, so I will go for another tree, again, taking that black and that brown. Same thin brush, short section. Maybe do another layer to make it just a little bit more opaque and dark. Cleaning my brush a little bit. Taking some clean water, just working on that edge. I'm not going over that whole line. And I'm just going to blot that edge up a little bit with my paper towel to texturize it. So this is kind of a cross between the texture method as well as the wash. So I'm going to switch my brush up a little bit. I need a really tiny one now for that tiny tree. Again, take that black and that brown, get it nice and opaque as possible. Kind of a, you know, some sections. Clean brush with some clean water, breaking that edge up a little bit. Again, not going over the whole thing. Do not go over the whole thing. Just work over the edge of that paint line you just made. Take that paper towel, blot that edge up. Texturize it. Okay, so opposite sides of the trees. Repeat this process. Black and brown. Yes, clean brush. Go over that edge there. Break it up a little bit. Here we go for that paper towel. Just blotting the edge. We are not blotting that whole line. Do not do that. We want to keep some of that opacity on the edge there. It's kind of starting to make this tree look a little bit three-dimensional. It's kind of cool. Oh, and FYI, we were making a birch tree here. I like birch trees. I think birch trees are pretty. Okay, anyway, plotting that a little bit, texturize it. Happy with it, so I'm going to move to the other tree. I'm going to move to my medium tree. Same deal, that black and that brown. Nice and opaque. Yeah, clean the brush, clean water, working on the edge there, breaking that edge up for this wash. And then take that paper towel, work on the edge, blotting it a little bit, texturizing it, making it look tree-like, birch tree-like. That's a happy little tree. Okay, so we're going to go for the small tree, and notice that I switched brushes here. I'm using my thin brush right now. Working that black and that brown all the way up. Clean brush, working on the inner edge of that line, breaking it up. Oh, and as carefully as you possibly can, take that paper towel. Go slow with this if you need to, and just texturize it. Make sure you are not picking up all the hard work that you just did. Okay. And this is the part right here where I kind of just look at my work and just kind of admire it, and also just kind of analyze what I'm going to do next. So right now, I'm going to let my trees dry a little bit, and I'm going to take my medium brush, and I'm going to take some yellow, and I'm going to go for that impressionism kind of technique that I showed you in class, where we take our paintbrush and we just make little, I don't know, dots. We just kind of gently press it and make these little dots to the paper. I'm just taking the yellows, and I'm being a little random with how I place them. Overlapping them sometimes, other times kind of giving them their own space. Yeah. And if you're looking at this and you're like, wait a minute, that path has white spaces in it, don't worry. Remember, this impressionism technique, we layer it. We go in for the lights first, we go in for the mediums, and then we go in for the darks. And right now we're just going for those light colors. So again, I'm just taking my brush, kind of making, I don't want to say polka dots, but I'm just gently placing my brush on the paper and just making a mark when it presses down. And I'm doing that repeatedly to do this process. Let's just keep going with this. All right, so as carefully as possible, you can take a small brush for this if you need to, which I did for those thinner spots. Yeah, continue doing that impressionism technique. Fill your spaces. Use that small brush for those smaller spaces. Okay, so I was kind of playing around here a little bit. I took a black. I wasn't happy with it. Then I took, kind of a black brown. Wasn't happy with that either. So I thought, you know what? I'm just going to use orange. And I was happy with this. So I kept going with it. And again, same deal. All I'm doing is I'm just pressing my brush to the paper and lifting it, making little dots. If you prefer to make your first layer, like just kind of to let it dry a little bit first before you do this process, that's fine. I don't know. I'm a big fan of letting my paint kind of like mix on the paper. But yeah, if you want this to be a little bit more like cobblestone-like, then I would let your layers dry in between. So yeah, I'm just kind of analyzing my work right now a little bit. Kind of thinking about what I want my next step to be. Okay, so I'm cleaning my brush off a little bit. Okay, so my tree's dried up a little bit, so I'm going to go for that dry brush technique now. Okay, completely different technique. We're changing our game up now, so you might want to get your notes out and check that out. So dry brush technique. This was the dry brush technique. It looks very brushy. I'm taking a black and a brown, getting a very nice, opaque, rich kind of layer of paint on my brush. Okay, and doing like these smiling lines, like swish, swish. Kind of making like those dark sections of like the bark on the birch tree. Just kind of swishing it out. Remember, if you want to get a better dry brush technique, it really does help to use your paper towel in between these strokes. I'm doing it, but I'm not doing it on screen. I'm doing it off screen. In between these strokes, or every time I load my brush, I'm just kind of running it onto my paper towel a little bit. Kind of dry it out, ensure that I'm going to get a true dry brush technique. So I'm going to go for that medium tree now. Again, taking that black and that brown. Mixing it, okay? And nice dry brush here. If you are getting a stroke that looks like it has water in it, if it doesn't look brushy, you're doing it wrong. So make sure that your brush is really dry when you're going for this. And notice I'm doing these smiling lines. So swish, smile, 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 all the way up, making it look nice and brushy, side to side, keeping it on the inside of that tree trunk. Cleaning my brush a little bit. So I'm going to work with a small brush for this tiny tree. Black and brown, lots of paint on my brush, using my paper towel to make it a true dry brush technique. And again, those smile lines, working them all the way up. And notice how I have some lines that are darker than others. That is good. You want that. Kind of analyzing it. I'm happy with it. But I think there's something missing. I think there's something missing between the ground and the sky. So, let's see what I'm going to do next. Whatever that might be. Okay, so take my tiny brush and I'm going to load it with that black and that brown. Another dry brush technique. And right over that white line, I'm going to cover that white line now. I'm just doing swishing motions, like swish. Covering that white line and just short strokes. Key to this, short strokes. This is another dry brush technique. Just covering that white line. Giving a little bit of the story into the background. This is a forest. Yeah, it's little abstract trees. Covering that white line, try to keep them all on the same starting point. Just quick flick of your brush there. I'm using the skinny brush, just in case you haven't noticed. So just quick flick of your brush. And there's not a lot of water on my brush to do that. So I'm going back, and I decided my trees were a little bit too short, a little bit too much of the same height. So I'm trying to, you know, kind of make them a little bit more organic, a little bit more unpredictable. Some short, some tall. And yeah, so I think I was kind of happy with that, so I'm going to move on to a different step. Okay, while we wait for those trees to dry, I am going to do another wash, and it's just the black and the brown, and I mixed a lot of water into it, and I mixed it on my plate. And I want to give it like this watercolor consistency. I want it to be transparent. I want to be able to see through this paint. Okay, so I'm going to do it on another tree. I'm going to do it on the small one. Okay, so just drawing those lines outward, going from a thick start to a thinner finish. Okay, so I'm going to go for the large tree trunk, get that line out there. Okay, and then please be careful with this. I realized at this point that, oh my gosh, my path is still wet. So I'm going to paint in my shadow as much as I can, but I'm going to wait before I keep going with it because my path is still wet and I don't want my path to turn into like this big muddy yellow brown blob. I'll come back to that shadow. But what I'm going to focus on now are the branches of the tree. So I just want you to kind of watch me do this a little bit, okay? So I mix my paint, get it really loaded onto that brush. Okay, and then I'm going to make a branch that goes from thick to thin. And then to get this really organic bendy line here, I just want you to notice that I kind of have a little bit of a higher up grip on my brush there. And as I'm pulling it outward from the tree, I want you to notice that the twisting motion that I'm doing with my fingers as I'm gripping the brush to kind of get that nice organic line. And again, you want this branch to start thick and you want it to end thin. So thick to thin. Twisting motion as you're pulling that line away from the tree. And then I make those connecting points a little bit thicker. And I maybe make some branches extending off of those. And again, as I'm painting these branches, please, please, please notice the motion of my fingers. They're twisting as I'm making that line. A gentle twisting line. That'll give you that organic kind of tree trunk shape there. Make it so it's kind of twisty, bendy. So I'm just twisting my hands around the brush, my fingers around the brush, and that's what's causing it to come out nice and bendy like this, not just like a straight line. Okay, so again, that connection, that part where the branch hits the tree, I'm making it just a little thick, okay? Thick line, twisting that brush as I pull it away. That line goes from thick to thin. Okay. Okay. All right, just kind of touching my work up here. And just analyzing it. And that my path, I think it kind of dried up a little bit, so I think now it's time, well, it's a good time for me to kind of make that shadow now. Okay, and again, we're doing a wash. You want to mix a lot of water into that paint there so you make sure it comes out transparent, you can see through it. That's a good idea for a wash, okay? This is good use for the wash, is doing any shadows that you have. Okay, so I'm going to go back for the path now. I'm just going to touch it up with a few little impressionism dots of orange here. Maybe I'll kick some into the grass a little bit, make it look like fallen leaves or something. Kind of making this little fall scene here. So I snuck some yellows in there. I know it's going really fast, but I did sneak some yellows in there in case you didn't notice. Okay, so maybe sneak some of those oranges and yellows of that impressionism technique on the sides there. Yeah. So I get a little bit of that white space there. So again, I'm going to go for those little like dots. Maybe just like fill it in a little bit. Those white spaces on the path with orange and the yellow. I'm going to like really fill this in. Kind of thinking, you know, this is a fall scene. Fall, lots of reds. So I'm kicking a little bit of, you know, red spots into those little leaf piles there. All right, so I feel donezo with this, okay? So at this point, please wait for it to dry completely before you do this step that I'm showing you right here. So I'm going to remove the tape, and I want you to notice how carefully I'm doing it. So I have one hand pulling the tape off and another hand holding the paper as I do this. We don't want to just yank it off, otherwise we're going to wreck this, okay? So gently peel that tape off. Okay, so gently, the other hand is bracing the paper. Ooh, and I accidentally snagged some. It happens sometimes. But yeah, peel that off gently. Using my other hand to brace the paper. And voila! Yeah, nice and official and nice and pretty. So that means that I can stop recording this video and I can officially go to bed. Bye, guys.